Hey howdy, hey folks, it is Mrs. Johnson with the Agri Wisdom Channel. We are talking about De-Icers and Livestock this week. This is going to be kind of brief. I did some research. I've been selling a lot of De-Icer to people, and I've been selling a lot of pet safe De-Icers to folks that are concerned about their pets. And it's important for us to know in agriculture when we raise livestock, because there are consequences of putting de-icers out for your livestock, and things to know when you put de-icer out. So we're going to talk about it. First and foremost, we're going to talk about how de-icers work. Now, de-icers typically work by being stuff that breaks up the typical water freezing structure. So when water freezes on this side, when just water freezes, creates these very rigid crystalline structures, and that is because the atoms themselves are polarized, I think the word is, basically meaning that there's a slightly positive and a slightly negative side. Why does that happen? Well, in oxygen's case, or in water's case, oxygen is a much bigger molecule than hydrogen. Hydrogen is the smallest atom that we find. Atom's the right word, not molecule. My apologies. Of one proton, one neutron, and one electron. And oxygen has 8 of those. And that makes it much bigger. And so what happens is, because hydrogen takes up this little tiny space, it actually can't hold on, because it's so little, it can't hold on to those electrons, which are out in space as well. And so the oxygen kind of like holds it closer, like they bond, because oxygen is like, ooh, I like having extra electrons, and I like being a little more negative. And so the oxygen, being bigger and being okay with being negative, holds on to it a little more. And so those electrons sit a little closer to the oxygen than they normally would for just hydrogen. And that makes kind of like two sides of a weak magnet. The oxygen is a little negative and the hydrogen is a little positive, and so it doesn't like really push anything away. It doesn't really pull anything, but it does give you just a little bit of a push or a little bit of a pull. Enough so that when they line up, they actually line up in a very specific order, in just plain H2O. So the hydrogen always sit right next to an oxygen to help balance that negativity out. Because if you remember, just one one water molecule, has those two sides, positive and negative, and so the positives sit next to negatives, negatives sit next to positives, and they create this really rigid structure. That makes ice. And how de-icers typically work is through ions and ionic bonds. Basically, like traditional table salt, sodium chloride. When dissolved in water, the two parts, the positive part and the negative part, break apart, and they're no longer attached. And those are called ions. So they actually break up that crystal structure, because rather than putting this positive next to that negative, you end up with like this negative next to that positive, and this positive next to that negative in the salt. Most de-icers are salts, which make them ionic bonds, which is very similar to this concept in water, but like more so. These are essentially, this salt compound is held together by a stronger magnet, essentially. And that's all. And that's how most de-icers work. There's some that have very similar routes. Some are not just two types of atoms. Some are like longer chains, but the concept still stands. Now, why do we care about how de-icers work when it comes to livestock? Well, one, they are poisonous when eaten because most of the time they're salts. And in most livestock diets, you can't have too much salt. Now, you will know that you might know that we feed things like sodium chloride and selenium with sodium chloride to animals. We give them salt licks. What is the difference between De-Icer and those salt licks? One, we've made salt licks to be eaten, and two, oftentimes in the winter, livestock will just eat salt, and sometimes they'll eat way too much, and that's what makes it poisonous. So you have to be careful of you have to keep an eye on your livestock to make sure that they're not overeating the salt or the de-icer when you put it out. As I said, some of them, like urea is often used as a fertilizer, so you have to be aware of that when you put it on the ground. But there's other things, like it eats away at concrete and things, so you might end up with slips anyway because you've created holes in your concrete floor of your barn. But it's also a skin irritant. Salts, urea, there's a couple other ones that I'll pull up. Particularly with dogs and cats and things with skin on their feet instead of hooves. And it will affect hooves to a certain degree, but hooves are a bit more tougher because they're the same stuff that your fingernails are made out of. I'm forgetting the word for that right now. But they'll get salt sores, and that's no fun to handle, particularly in bad weather, because a lame animal is more likely to trip and more likely to hurt itself. So let's talk about some alternatives. We have pet safety icers, which essentially, let me pull up my notes. Okay, so we have pet safety icers like propylene glycol, urea, notes, like magnesium chloride, calcium chloride, acetates, yeah. Now those are all salts that are less of a skin irritant, or not as appealing to eat. More often, less of a skin irritant, and they're often less effective in really, really cold weather, and they work a little slower. You can also use things like sand or gravel and just spread sand or gravel, because it allows for more traction rather than actually getting rid of the salt or the ice. My apologies. You can also use something called barn lime. I'm not super familiar with that product, but it is a really slow de-icer that was recommended specifically for things like barns. Overall, in conclusion, when you're talking about de-icers, particularly when you're considering on using it in something like your barn or around livestock in general, you want to do everything that you can to prevent it coming into contact with skin and to prevent ingestion when you use it. If you use it, you're going to want to monitor your animals fairly closely, make sure they're not eating it, touching it to an unnecessary degree, and if they're eating it, either pick it up or offer them a safer thing to eat that's not de-icer, like salt blocks. You want to use alternatives when you can and when it's feasible. So putting down salt and de-icer might be, or putting down, sand and a little bit of de-icer might be a better alternative or a better solution than just de-icer. And you want to shovel and plow and pick up ice whenever possible. Now, if you've ever used de-icer, you'll know that it actually melts water because it breaks up these crystalline structures. And so you can spread de-icer, let it sit, and then pick up the ice once it breaks. And that can be helpful. And so you might have to shovel more often than you normally would without de-icer with livestock, because you want to get both the ice and the de-icer off the ground, so then the livestock can come back into an area. But without further ado, I'm going to let you go. I hope we learned something today, and if you have comments, questions, concerns, drop them in the comments below. And I'm gonna read. So I hope you join me over on the FFA Lullabies playlist. So yeah, have a great day. We'll see you soon.